He never asked for trouble. He was simply living his life, working hard, and minding his own business. Yet in one ordinary moment, the color of his skin became a target, and everything spiraled into chaos. What should have been routine turned into humiliation, fear, and a fight for dignity. This wasn't just an attack on one man. It was a reminder of a wound that society refuses to heal. His story is raw, painful, and unforgettable. And once you hear it, you'll understand why. Silence is no longer an option, but what unfolded next would shake his entire world and expose a truth too many still deny. Marcus lived a life that many would call ordinary. He worked long hours at his job, came home to a small apartment, and spent weekends visiting his mother or catching a game with friends. He wasn't looking for conflict, just peace, stability, and the quiet satisfaction of building something for himself. To those who knew him, Marcus was steady, respectful, and hardworking. But in a world where his skin color spoke louder than his character, ordinary was never truly safe. That night, as Marcus went about his usual routine, the air seemed heavier, the silence sharper. He didn't know it yet, but the comfort of his normal life was about to be shattered. He thought it was just another day, but shadows were already forming around him, waiting to strike. Marcus had walked this path countless times before, but that night it felt different. The street was quiet, yet not peaceful. There was a heaviness in the air that pressed against him. He adjusted his backpack, quickening his pace when headlights washed over him. A patrol car slowed, crawling beside him as if tracking prey. At first he told himself it was nothing. Just routine, just coincidence. But then the car stopped. The doors swung open. And from that moment, Marcus knew he was no longer seen as a man, but as a threat. The officers stepped out, their eyes sharp, their posture rigid. They didn't ask where he was headed or if he needed help. Instead, their first demand cut through the night like a blade. "Show your hands." Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He complied, but even his silence was treated with suspicion. They surrounded him, circling like wolves, asking questions laced with accusations. Where was he coming from? What was he carrying? Why was he in this neighborhood? It didn't matter that Marcus worked just a few blocks away. It didn't matter that he had every right to be there. In their eyes, his skin was evidence enough. The more he tried to explain, the less they listened. Each word only seemed to fuel their assumptions. One officer reached for his bag, ripping it from his shoulder without permission, scattering his belongings on the sidewalk. Work papers, a phone charger, a book his mother had given him, all treated like contraband. Marcus felt the sting of humiliation burn hotter than fear. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, watching, whispering, but no one came outside. To them, it was just another scene they had grown used to, too common to be shocking, too dangerous to interrupt. When Marcus dared to ask why he was being stopped, the response was a smirk and a shove. His body tensed as rage surged within him. But he knew the danger of letting it show. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and the night could end in tragedy. He swallowed his pride, fighting back the storm inside, all while knowing his dignity was being stripped away piece by piece. The officers exchanged glances, as if deciding his fate right there on the pavement. For Marcus, every second felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. He wanted to believe it would end soon, that they would realize he had done nothing wrong. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't about justice. This was about power, control, and the unspoken rules of a broken system. What came next would push Marcus further than he ever imagined, testing not just his patience, but his very survival. Because the humiliation wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a nightmare he could never forget. The streetlights glared down like spotlights as Marcus stood frozen, his belongings scattered at his feet. One officer's hand hovered near his weapon, the other barked orders that tangled together, each louder, sharper, more threatening than the last. Marcus raised his trembling hands higher, his voice breaking as he tried to steady himself. But the fear wasn't just in his chest. It was in the way his knees threatened to give out, in the way every second stretched like an eternity. Then it happened. One of the officers shoved him hard against the wall, his face pressed into the cold concrete. The sting of metal cuffs bit into his wrists before he could even ask why. His protests went unheard, drowned out by the crackle of radios and the rush of adrenaline-fueled commands. The world shrank to that single moment, his dignity stripped, his freedom crushed, and his body shaking with the weight of helplessness. Neighbors who had once hidden now gathered, some with phones raised, recording. Every lens captured the truth. A man punished not for his actions, but for his existence. The humiliation, the rage, the sheer injustice burned in Marcus's chest until it felt like fire. He wasn't just fighting to breathe against the pressure on his back. He was fighting against a history that had written this scene 1,000 times before. And in that instant, as his eyes met the crowd, he realized the weight of it all. This wasn't just his nightmare. It was a mirror of a reality that too many lived and too many ignored. The question now wasn't whether Marcus would survive the night. It was whether his story would be buried in silence or finally ignite a voice. Too powerful to be ignored, because what happened next would change everything. When the cuffs finally came off, Marcus was left standing in the street with red marks burning around his wrists, his belongings scattered like debris from a storm. The officers drove away without explanation, without apology, leaving him bruised, in body and spirit. He gathered his things in silence, each item a reminder of the humiliation he'd just endured. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like the end of an encounter. But for Marcus, it was only the beginning of a burden he would carry forever. That night changed him. The fear of knowing that at any moment his skin could turn him into a suspect never left. Simple acts, walking home, going to work, existing, no longer felt safe. And yet, beneath the pain, a fire grew. Marcus knew he couldn't let his story be swallowed by silence, because silence only feeds the cycle. His experience wasn't just his own. It was shared by countless others who faced the same injustice in different streets, in different cities, across generations. This is the truth too often hidden. Racism doesn't always announce itself with slurs or open violence. Sometimes it lives in the smirk of power, in the shove that leaves no scar but deepens the wound of dignity. It lives in the quiet acceptance of those who look away instead of standing up. Marcus survived that night. But the question that lingers is larger than his survival. How many more have to endure the same before change becomes unavoidable? Because this isn't just one man's story. It's a reflection of a society still at war with its own conscience. And the choice is ours: to let it continue, or to finally demand the justice every human being deserves.